October 1st, 1993, Las Vegas, Nevada. $3.1 million. Gone. In 20 minutes. And the strangest part? The driver wasn't a criminal. She was 21. No record, no motive, no reason to do any of this. Heather Tallchief was a nursing assistant. She had held the hands of dying men in San Francisco AIDS hospices. She had never been arrested. She had never fired a gun before that summer. And on a Friday morning in October, she drove an armored truck full of $3 million out of a circus parking lot and vanished into the desert. But this isn't just a story about a robbery. It's about a 48-year-old poet who had already killed once, a goat skull altar in a San Francisco apartment, hypnosis tapes, sex magic, a map memorized in a trance, and a 12-year manhunt that ended when a woman walked into a federal courthouse and said 3 words. One heist, $3.1 million, one broken girl, one man who had written his way out of prison, and a second disappearance that continues to this day. This is how a convicted murderer turned a lost 21-year-old into the perfect getaway driver. To understand what happened on October 1st, 1993, you have to go back 24 years, to San Francisco, to a Woolworth store on Market Street. February 21st, 1969, a winter morning, 3 men waiting outside in the cold sun. One of them was Roberto Ignacio Solis, 24 years old, born in Nicaragua. He came to San Francisco at age 2. He grew up in the Haight-Ashbury. Before the robbery started, he had spent his nights reading poetry at coffee shop open mics. A Loomis armored truck pulled up that morning. The guard who stepped out was Louis Dake, 61 years old, father of 6 children. He was carrying a money bag. Solis and his accomplices closed in. "Give us the money." Dake looked at them. He turned the bag inside out, empty. The pickup was dry. There was nothing inside. 2 bullets in the back. Anyway, Louis Dake bled out on the sidewalk, while shoppers scattered and sirens wailed in the distance. 6 children lost their father that day. The money bag was empty. Roberto Solis had killed a man for nothing. Within days, the police had him in handcuffs. The trial was short, life sentence at Folsom Prison. He escaped once. He made it 2 blocks before they dragged him back. He escaped again in 1972. Same result. After that, he stopped running. He picked up a pen instead. The name on the poetry books was Pancho Aguila. His first collection was published in 1976. Then another. 5 in total. Raw verse, urgent, alive. Something critics called redemption. Other writers took notice. Publishers took notice. Here was a man who had transformed himself behind bars. A killer who had found his voice in the darkness. The back covers mentioned Nicaragua, the coffee shop scene, the Haight-Ashbury days. Not a word about Louis Dake. Not a word about the empty money bag. Not a word about the 2 bullets. Not a word about the 6 children who grew up without a father. Letters started arriving at the California Parole Board in the 1980s. Prominent poets, respected publishers, literary figures with influence, all of them saying the same thing. Roberto Solis is a changed man. His poetry proves it. Give him another chance. The letters made the case that literature itself had rehabilitated him. Here was a man who wrote with a gentleness that could not coexist with violence. Here was a man whose words moved strangers to tears. If art is a window into the soul, the parole board was told, then Roberto Solis has a soul worth saving. Nobody wrote letters for Louis Dake. Nobody wrote letters for the 6 children. They had no literary champions. They had no published collections. They had only a grave and a memory, and the silence of the sidewalk where their father died. In September 1991, 23 years after killing Louis Dake, Solis walked out of Folsom Prison a free man, less than a quarter of his life sentence served. The poets had opened the gates. 48 years old now, back in San Francisco, nightclubs every weekend. Warm eyes scanning the crowd, looking for something, someone. So who did he find? Early 1993, a nightclub somewhere in the city, smoke hanging in the air, music pounding through the walls. A girl named Heather Tallchief sits alone at the bar, nursing a drink she cannot afford. 21 years old, Seneca Nation. She grew up in Buffalo with an absent mother, a father who drank too much, and a stepmother whose fists left bruises. She learned early how to disappear inside her own life. Keep your head down. Do not cry. Do not answer back. Bruises heal if no one asks about them. By the time she was a teenager, Heather had perfected the art of being invisible in a house where being seen meant being hit. At 17, a bus across the country to find her birth mother. She found her, also an addict, also broken. Heather stayed anyway because there was nowhere else to go. A GED came eventually, then a nursing certificate. 4 years working AIDS hospices in San Francisco during the worst of the epidemic, holding the hands of dying men, watching them waste away, saying goodbye over and over until the goodbyes stopped meaning anything. It was the early 90s. The epidemic was at its peak. Young men arrived at the hospices already skeletal. They died in weeks, sometimes days. Heather learned their names. She learned their favorite songs. She held their hands when no family came. Then the family came, and she held their hands too. 4 years of this. 4 years of bearing witness to grief that no one had warned her about. She was 20 when the numbness started. She was 21 when the numbness stopped working. Then came the cocaine to numb it. Then came the job loss. Then came rock bottom. Broke, high, alone, sitting in a nightclub with nothing ahead of her and nothing behind. And then a man approached. 48 years old, almost 30 years her senior, calm voice, warm eyes, a question that sounded like a door opening. Would she like him to read her tarot? His name was Roberto. The first visit to his apartment revealed the altar. It dominated the living room. Candles, incense, crystals arranged around a goat skull with the horns still attached. 2 chalices sat at the center, one filled with something red, one filled with something white. "Do you believe in the devil?" he asked. Before she could answer, he was offering cocaine, cutting lines on a mirror, talking about something called sex magic, using the body to manifest desires, he explained. Ritual and release, energy and intention. Their meeting was predestined. He told her they were on a spiritual journey together, something special. Nobody had ever called her special before. A few weeks into whatever this was, relationship, obsession, manipulation disguised as love, the confession came. Prison, he said, a robbery that went wrong, a guard who died. His voice was soft when he talked about it, regretful, the voice of a man who had made a terrible mistake and spent 2 decades paying for it. The poetry came after, he said, the transformation. A different man emerged from those years in Folsom. And she believed every word. Of course she did. She was 21 and lost and high and desperate to be seen. And here was this older man with his altar and his tarot and his promises of something bigger than the life she had been living. The red flags were everywhere, but she couldn't see them, or maybe she didn't want to. Summer 1993 brought the suggestion of Las Vegas. A feeling about the place, Roberto said. Something about beating all the odds, no questions asked, bags packed, an apartment near the Strip. Then job applications appeared on the kitchen table. Security companies, armored car services. Fill these out, he said, and she did. And Loomis Armored hired her. In August, the firearms test was mandatory. She scored higher than anyone in her training class, record marks that stunned the instructors and impressed her co-workers. What none of them knew, months of training in the apartment beforehand, Roberto teaching her how to shoot, an AK-47 hidden in the closet. What none of them knew, all of it had been building towards something. Her assignment was driving the armored truck, casino runs, ATM refills, millions of dollars riding in the back while her partners went inside to service the machines. Across town, Roberto rented a warehouse. He painted a sign on the door, Armored Car Servicing. At night, VHS tapes played in the apartment. Strange tapes, swirling colors, spirals and patterns that made her drowsy, agreeable, disconnected from herself. He drew a map. He made her memorize it, over and over. Left turn, right turn, straight for 2 blocks, until the route felt automatic. Until her own voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere else. A man who had killed once, a warehouse with a fake sign, a 21-year-old driver who could outshoot every instructor on the range. Think she was really in love, or was she already gone? Drop your take below, and subscribe, because what happens next is not what Roberto planned. October 1st, 1993. Eyes opening to swirling colors on the screen. Roberto standing over her with the map, his voice tight, his hands trembling. Today. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Uniform on. Drive to work. The truck was waiting in the lot with $3.1 million inside for the weekend rush. Her partners that morning were Scott Stewart and Steve Marshall. The first stop was Circus. Parked behind the casino, Steve and Scott jumped out for the ATM refill. 20 minutes inside while the driver waited with the truck. Standard procedure. Except on this particular Friday morning at 9:20 in the morning, Heather Tallchief put the truck in drive and pulled out of the Circus parking lot without looking back. The map unspooled in her head. Left turn, right turn, straight for 2 blocks. Vegas sun blinding through the windshield. $3 million riding heavy in the darkness behind her. The radio on her belt crackled. A dispatcher's voice, a routine check-in. She did not answer. 3 more seconds. The radio would go silent, then it would crackle again. And again. And then, within minutes, someone at the dispatch center would notice. A supervisor would be alerted. A patrol car would be sent. She had a window. She could feel it closing around her like a door. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter. She turned left, then right. She did not look in the mirror. She did not want to know if anyone was behind her. There, the sign. Armored car servicing. The warehouse door opening. The truck rolling in. The door closing behind her. The light disappearing. Roberto was waiting in the shadows. And he looked different now. Eyes hungry, desperate, vibrating with something ugly. "Get out," he said. And she did. He took her gun first, snatched it from her hand. Then he started barking orders. "Hurry up! Get the money out!" His voice cracking, his hands shaking. This was not the poet. This was not the man who read her tarot and talked about spiritual journeys. This was the man who shot Louis Dake twice in the back for an empty money bag. Duffel bags filled with cash. Hundreds, 20s, stack after stack after stack. The weight was staggering. 60 pounds, 80 pounds, over 100 pounds of currency. It was taking longer than planned. Roberto checking the door every few seconds, checking his watch, sweat on his forehead. Then the truck was abandoned. The bags were loaded into a car. The airport next. A gray wig, makeup smeared into wrinkles, a wheelchair, an old woman being pushed through the terminal by her doctor, boarding a chartered plane, taking off into the desert sky. While Scott and Steve walked out of Circus to find an empty parking space where the truck used to be. They stared at the empty pavement. They checked their watches. They checked the space next to them. They looked at each other. It took them almost a full minute to accept what they were seeing. An armored truck does not simply disappear. Radios came out. Calls were made. The dispatcher at Loomis did not believe the first report. "Say again, over. Are you telling me your truck is not there?" By 9:40 in the morning, every casino security team on the Strip had been alerted. By 10, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police had officers at the Circus lot. By noon, the FBI had taken over. And by then, Heather and Roberto were already in the air. By the time the FBI took over the case, Heather and Roberto were already in Denver. Fingerprints found in her apartment matched Roberto Ignacio Solis, convicted murderer, paroled poet, the man who killed Louis Dake in 1969. A goodbye letter surfaced, written to her mother. "Don't worry," it said. "We have never been true friends." The warehouse turned up empty, the armored truck inside, stripped and useless. Forged passports appeared in a Miami hotel room with unfamiliar names and entry stamps for Suriname. Decoys, probably, or plans that changed. A limo driver in Denver remembered a man pushing an old woman in a wheelchair. Strange, because the woman stood up and walked away. After that, the trail went cold. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Heather Tallchief and Roberto Solis had vanished with $3 million, and nobody knew where they had gone. So what do you do with $3 million, a murderer, and a secret that can get you killed? Amsterdam, 1994. 6 months on the run. New names, new passports. Money hidden somewhere only Roberto knew. And Heather was pregnant. The baby came in June, a boy. She named him Emilio. Looking at his face, something broke inside her. This was not the spiritual journey Roberto had promised. This was hiding, fear, watching every door. This was asking permission to buy diapers because he controlled every dollar of the $3 million they had stolen together. Worse, Roberto had changed. Or maybe he had finally revealed what was always there. Disappearing for days without explanation, bringing other women home to the apartment they shared, showing no interest in the baby, no warmth, no love. The poet was gone. What remained was cold, indifferent, hollow, the same emptiness that had looked at Louis Dake bleeding on a sidewalk and felt nothing at all. 2 months after Emilio was born, she waited until Roberto was out. She moved through the apartment, opening drawers, checking hiding spots. She found $18,000 within reach, some jewelry. The rest was locked away. He controlled it. Her bag packed, the baby in her arms. She stood by the door when he walked in. "I'm leaving, taking Emilio." A look at her, a look at the bag, a look at the baby. His face did not change. No argument, no threat, no offer of more money. The man who wrote poetry in prison, who killed a guard for nothing, who hypnotized her with VHS tapes and sex magic and promises of something special. He just shrugged. "Okay," he said. That single word would hurt more than anything else that came before or after. The complete indifference. He never cared. Maybe he never had. Out the door with the 2-month-old and $18,000. Out of $3 million. Less than 1%. Behind her, the man she had loved. The money she had stolen. The life she had destroyed for him. Roberto Solis watched her go, and then he disappeared. Nobody ever saw him again. A fake British passport materialized through contacts she would never name. Donna Marie Eaton, Manchester. The baby became Dylan Eaton. A new accent to practice, a new walk to learn, hair cut short, a different person entirely. Amsterdam remained home. Hotel made work, cash only, no paperwork, no photographs, never the real name, never a call to family. Close friends became impossible because every question was a trap. Where are you from? What did you do before? Where is Dylan's father? Wrong answer, and everything ends. She invented a history and memorized it. A dead husband in Manchester, a small inheritance, a fresh start on the continent. She practiced the story until it sounded like a memory. She practiced Dylan's fake birthday until she almost forgot his real one. She worked double shifts at the hotel. She cleaned rooms for tourists who never noticed her. She learned the Dutch words for bleach and toilet and thank you. She took the tram home each night and flinched at every stranger who looked at her twice. Lonely, yes, but alive. Back in America, her face was everywhere. Unsolved Mysteries ran her story. America's Most Wanted broadcast her photograph into millions of living rooms. The FBI put her on the 10 Most Wanted list. Number 3, the highest-ranking woman since 1950. Agents chased leads across continents. They found nothing. Her father sat in Buffalo watching every episode, certain his daughter was dead. Shark bait. That was what the cops told him. Roberto killed her, dumped the body, took everything. Fred Tall Chief spent 12 years mourning a daughter who was scrubbing hotel toilets in Amsterdam, walking Dylan to school under a borrowed name, checking the locks 3 times every night before she could sleep. He kept a photograph of her on a shelf in Buffalo. Some nights he would take it down and hold it and cry. Some nights he would put it back without a word. His daughter was out there. Or his daughter was in the ground. He did not know which was worse. The FBI called him occasionally with updates. There were no updates. They only called because protocol required it. Every call was the same. No leads, no sightings, no progress. We are sorry. 12 years of this. 4,380 days. And every single one of them afraid. By 2005, Dylan was 10 years old and asking questions. Why does his passport say Dylan Eaton? Why is there no father on the birth certificate? Why does his mother flinch at every knock at the door? Worse, the passports were expiring. Renewal meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant discovery. And discovery meant the end of everything. Looking at her son, the math became clear. No college with a forged passport. No real job. No future. Trapped because of what had happened when she was 21. Hypnotized. in love with a murderer who had abandoned her with a baby and $18,000. September 15th, 2005, Amsterdam to Los Angeles. The fake passport used one last time. A coach seat, no sleep. The Atlantic passing below while she thought about the girl who woke up to swirling colors, who memorized a map, who drove $3 million into a warehouse and then flew away disguised as an old woman. That girl was gone now. 12 years of running had burned her away. A bus to Las Vegas. The city was bigger now, shinier. Towers that did not exist when she left. Circus still standing. But she would not go near it. A hotel room, gray blazer, pink blouse, pale olive slacks. A mirror. 33 years old. Half a lifetime ago, a nursing assistant holding dying men's hands in San Francisco. Now about to walk into a federal building and surrender. The courthouse lobby was cold. Marble floors, fluorescent lights, a security desk. "I am Heather Tall Chief," she said. "I'm here to turn myself in." Blank stares from the guards. Then a computer check. Recognition spreading across a face. Phone calls. Agents rushing down hallways. The FBI had written her off years ago. They assumed Roberto had killed her, took the money, vanished forever. Walking through that door was the last thing anyone expected. "Running gets exhausting," she told them. "Living in a mental prison. What is a cell compared to that? A box, a room, restricted privileges. Nothing compared to 12 years of looking over your shoulder. I'm setting myself free." The agents who interviewed her that day would later describe her demeanor as eerily calm. She answered every question. She named every fake identity. She mapped out Amsterdam. She described the warehouse. She described the wig and the wheelchair and the chartered plane. She refused to say only one thing. She would not name the people who had sold her the fake passport. She would not give up anyone who had helped her hide. 12 years of fear had taught her that some doors must stay closed, even now. The charges stacked up. Embezzlement, bank fraud, bank robbery, false statements, interstate flight, firearm in a violent crime, fraudulent passport. Maximum exposure, 40 years. Her lawyers brought a psychiatrist who testified about brainwashing, the sex magic, the VHS tapes, the hypnosis. The prosecution countered with their own expert, greed and love. They argued choices, not compulsion. The courtroom heard both versions. A young woman manipulated by a cult leader with a goat skull altar. A young woman who fell for an older man and chose to rob a truck for $3 million. Somewhere between those two versions was the truth. The judge would have to decide how much weight each story deserved. March 30th, 2006, 63 months. 5 years and change. Restitution ordered, $2.9 million. The money did not exist anymore. Roberto had taken it all. Time served. Release in 2010. 5 more years of federal supervision. By 2015, finally free. Back to healthcare work. The same profession as before Roberto. Before the altar and the tarot and the swirling colors on the screen. Dylan graduated college in 2019. They remain close. Roberto Ignacio Solis has not been seen since 1995. The FBI still lists him as a fugitive, armed and dangerous, late 70s if alive. $3 million never recovered, not a single bill. In 2021, someone asked her about him one last time. "Probably dead," she said. "No way. Is he still out there? No way. But if he is, good on you, mate. You did it." Then a pause. "If you find him, please don't tell him where I am." There is something unsettling about the Heather Tall Chief case. It is not the crime itself. $3 million is a lot. But bigger heists happen every year. It is not the method. Driving a truck away is not sophisticated. What unsettles people is the architecture of it. Roberto Solis did not find a partner. He built one. He saw a broken 21-year-old in a nightclub and reverse engineered her into the perfect driver. The altar, the tarot, the cocaine, the sex magic, the hypnosis tapes, the map memorized in a trance. Every piece was designed to turn a grieving nursing assistant into a weapon. And then, when the weapon walked out the door with his baby, he shrugged. The poet who wrote his way out of a life sentence had one final piece of writing left in him, his own disappearance. He had killed a man in 1969 and served 23 years. He had stolen $3 million in 1993 and served 0 days. Heather Tallchief served 63 months in federal prison. She paid every price he should have paid. She lost her 20s. She lost her freedom. She lost the man she thought was her soulmate. She gave birth on the run, raised a son under a false name, and walked into a courthouse 33 years old, asking for handcuffs. Roberto Solis is somewhere, or nowhere. A porch in Central America. A grave in a place no one will ever dig. A fishing village with a new name and a careful smile. An old man reading the newspaper in a country with no extradition treaty. Every year, a handful of tips come into the FBI. A man in Mexico who writes poetry in Spanish. A recluse in a Caribbean village who matches the description. A stranger in a Central American capital who pays cash for everything. Every tip is logged. Every tip is checked. None of them have ever led anywhere. The Loomis armored truck he stole was recovered the same afternoon in the warehouse. Stripped. Useless. The $3 million was never recovered. Not a single bill has ever surfaced in circulation. No marked note, no traceable stack, nothing. Either Roberto spent the money slowly enough to avoid detection, or he hid it somewhere so well that not even his own death has revealed it, or someone else took it from him long ago and the money is already gone. Somewhere out there, maybe. A poet who killed a man for an empty money bag, who wrote his way out of a life sentence, who found a broken 21-year-old in a nightclub and hypnotized her into stealing $3 million, who took the money, abandoned the baby, shrugged when she said she was leaving, and walked off into a world that has not seen him since. She served 5 years in federal prison. He never served a day. For the theft, for the manipulation, for the baby he abandoned, for the woman he turned into a fugitive, for any of it, not one day. The poets opened the gates in 1991, and they have never closed since. And that brings us to the end of our story. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and activate the bell button so you can receive new videos.